Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. And I don't know what this is. It must be like Technology Breaks Month or something. So the bulb is gone, which is hardly the most pressing issue of today's video. Obviously, the main thing is that the camera is a webcam because there's something wrong with my main camera, and I have no idea what it is. I sat down to film right now. The camera doesn't work. I can't get it to work, but I have to get this video out for Monday, so unfortunately you've got a slightly more lo-fi setup, but I will try very hard to try and get the video equipment fixed, ready for the next video, because I don't like this kind of lo-fi setup. Look how small that looks. It's tiny. So September's ended up being a very electronic focused month. A good number of records that I'm going to be talking about today are electronic focused. And there's some real transgressive sounds coming out of some of these artists, some of these albums. I'm very excited to talk about them. I'll be interested to see if maybe that's my bias, because I'm very much an electronic music fan, so I've ended up being drawn towards those records more than perhaps other records this month. But I do feel as if September is the electronic month of 2018. I mean, so far, maybe October, November or December will eclipse that. I also have to apologise because I've only covered 8 releases this month. I usually do 10, 11, 12, more than that. But I've just had so much work. My master's course is full on. I'm in 5 days a week. I have weekend work. I already have several projects to get done. So it is really battering me already very early on. So that's the reason I haven't had a chance to check out quite as many records as I normally would. But hopefully come to the beginning of November and I will have checked out lots of October, because I already have a nice long list of things I need to listen to. It means I didn't get a chance to properly listen to Octavian, Joey Purp, Paul McCartney's Egypt Station. There's a couple of records I really wanted to talk about, like those ones, and I haven't had a chance to. Hopefully I will get a chance to listen to them a lot more, and maybe if I like them a lot, they'll end up on my best of 2018 roundup, who knows. Also, Pinegrove's new album will be included in my October roundup, as will KKB, because they both came out right at the tail end of this month, and really I focused most of my listening at the end of the month on Tim Hecker's record. So you'll see those soon. I don't like Spiritualized and Nothing Hurt. To start off with, I'm not the biggest Spiritualized fan anyway. That little caveat probably needs to be mentioned before I jump into this review. Spiritualized are a space rock band from Warwickshire in Britain, masterminded by Jason Pearce, and there's very much a Robert Fripp King Crimson dimension going on with this band. You know, as with King Crimson, Robert Fripp pretty much leads the entire band, or certainly the band revolves around him with a constantly changing lineup. Similar with Jason Pearce and Spiritualized, so songwriting wise, in terms of the direction of the band, you need to look at him really when it comes to that kind of thing. Incidentally, I will be returning to King Crimson for next week's guide, so look out for that one. Space rock's a funny thing because it doesn't really mean anything. It's one of those terms that is just very transient. It's broad, it encompasses 60s, 70s psychedelia that people like Pink Floyd were doing, but it also gets mixed up with that reverby shoegaze sound of the 90s, so space rock really means everything and nothing as well. So it's difficult to pin down, and as a record, And Nothing Hurt is kind of similar. At its core, it's a rock record, it's a rock album, but it incorporates lots of different approaches to each track, Jason Pearce taking on different ways of songwriting, really. You have the fiery cacophony with the track The Morning After, and you have the twee opening of A Perfect Miracle, but then you have that squawking saxophone on the track On the Sunshine, and he just takes a lot of different approaches to his composition, and this record definitely shows that. The thing is, saccharine and overblown is kind of a core part of the Spiritualized sonic palette. That is just what Spiritualized sound like, and the people that love and listen to the widely lauded Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space, which is the Spiritualized record that everybody has heard or everybody knows of. It's chock full of melodrama, and that works for many listeners. It just doesn't really work for me. One thing I've always struggled with is Pearce's vocal delivery. It lacks a power, a confidence sometimes, and I've always felt that these high levels of melodrama in Spiritualized music could do with a much stronger vocal delivery, and I don't find Jason's delivery convincing. And that's one of the issues I've always had with Spiritualized, but it hit home for me even more on this record, what is supposed to be the final Spiritualized record. On Here It Comes, for example, the track fails to sink its teeth in because of that languid voice. It's just so droll. Granted, this has been a well-received record broadly speaking, and if you adore Spiritualized, then you are likely to enjoy this record, so you have to take my review in its context of the fact that I don't really like the Spiritualized sound. The thing is, I don't mind, ladies and gentlemen, we're floating in space, but I'm really struggling to find the merit in Jason Pierce's songwriting this time round more than ever. They seem to lack any semblance of subtlety, and perhaps that's missing the point with Spiritualized. Maybe their music isn't supposed to be subtle. It's supposed to be quite grandiose, quite melodramatic, and I just feel that maybe a slightly more sleight of hand with the subtlety might not go amiss with their music. I don't know. It just, for me, this record doesn't land, but that's more down to my opinions on the sound of Spiritualized than anything else. Let me know your thoughts on it, because I know some people have really enjoyed this record, so I'd love to have a discussion about that. I don't mind. Brockhampton, Iridescence. So this is the record review this month that's bound to get me a lot of downvotes because they have a rabid fan base. People love Brockhampton. I can totally see why, because they are one of the most exciting acts to come out of the last few years. I myself am a huge self-confessed fan of the Saturation trilogy. I talked about all of the albums last year as they came out, and I thought that it was just one of the most exciting hip-hop projects we've had in a really long time. Not just hip-hop projects, but projects in general. This boy band, this collective of people creating 3 records full of utter bangers, and it got to the point where I was devising my own playlist of my favourite tracks across the 3 Saturation records and listening to those. And I think personally that is the way to approach the Saturation trilogy. It's not about sequencing, it's more about your favourite tracks and maybe making your own playlist out of those tracks. And I think that's something that a lot of people ended up doing. Hype has been really high for the boy band's follow-up, Iridescence. Of course it has. The last 3 records were so well reviewed, and they came out very quickly, and we were supposed to be getting the record earlier in the year. There was delays, and now it's finally here. So where did they go from that Saturation trilogy? I feel weird about this record. I admire it for many reasons, specifically the production, I think, which is very experimental, and in some places I actually found it quite unflinching, like that unwavering track District, which sounds like a fizzing circuit board, the sub-bass wobble of Where the Cash At. Even that syrupy R&B sound, which could be found hanging around at the back of the Saturation records, is done so well here on a track like Honey, which switches up from menacing to something very euphoric towards the end. I think there are some real nice sleights of hand on this record. And of course Wait, which is the centerpiece of the record, has an enormous amount of emotion and space to it, not least because of Kevin Abstract's very confessional lyrical delivery. During other parts of the record it seems very muddy, confused, and a little bit lost, to be honest. There are entire sections of tracks that feel as if they're striving for something very original, but they end up just getting lost in the idea. And I think that happens a few times, that these tracks, they don't manage to land. Take, for example, drowns out its vocal deliveries with the production, which I think is a bit of a mistake, because it's a record which is defined by the vocal deliveries. So by drowning it out, you're really losing something there. And also, this track has a kind of muddy, forgettable chorus. Now, I'm not saying that all hip-hop projects should have very memorable choruses, or even choruses at all, because some of my favourite hip-hop projects forego choruses and they just have straight verses. But that's usually because they have engaging delivery, strong bars, memorable lines, and Iridescence for me sometimes feels surprisingly devoid of that. I think there are also weak links in the band. Joba, for example, almost every single time he turns up irritates me, like on the track Berlin, for example, with that grating delivery. Does nothing for me. I really feel like as a collective they may have done everything they can do, and what's best for them to now do is split off and create their own projects. I kind of want a Wu-Tang situation where they all go off and create these masterpiece solo records like what Gizzard did with Liquid Swords, and we had ODB's Return to 36 Chambers Dirty Version. Only Built for Cuban Links by Raekwon, all of those records that came out of that collective initially. I kind of want that to happen with Brockhampton, and I feel like it will happen, because I just don't know if they necessarily gel well enough to keep creating records. Sure, Saturation had so many good tracks on it, but I just wonder if maybe it's worth them going off and doing their own separate things, and we'll get to see each member of this group strike out in their own right and get to do their own thing. I hope we do get to see that. Maybe there is another really good record in Brockhampton, I'm not sure. What do you guys think about that? I like Aphex Twin, Collapse. Do you remember when Warp started ramping up these promotional clues, we would be getting some new Aphex Twin release. Everyone was really excited, and then when it was announced that it was an EP, everyone felt just slightly cheated. Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter because this 5-track EP is peak Aphex Twin. It stands up proudly alongside many of RDJ's other releases, and if you like Aphex Twin, you're gonna like this. If you like electronic music, you're gonna like this. If you need a primer on the electronic music legend that is Aphex Twin, aka Richard D. James, all you need to do is go onto my main channel page, scroll down to the guide twos, and watch my guide to Aphex Twin. I spent ages working on that. I did it a while ago. Yes, I'm promoting my own channel, but you're here watching it, so hey. Now, I'm someone who really liked his last EP, Cheetah, which was released in 2016, but I know a lot of people felt it to be a minor Aphex Twin release, and I can appreciate why that is. It was very different. It was sort of a bit of electro-funk. It was RDJ having fun with some old hardware, essentially. And it came after the first full length since 2001, which was Cyro. And a lot of people didn't like Cyro, even though I think Cyro is a wonderful record. I find it a really cozy listen, although that may be quite connected to my own personal experiences of when the record came out and I was commuting through London, and that record, listening to it on large Sennheiser headphones on the commute in the morning, just it gave me a sense of comfort and warmth. So personally for me, Cyro is one of those fantastic albums that I'll hold up as one of my favourites. But some people didn't like it, so it feels as if for those people craving the other side of Richard D. James, maybe the slightly more combative side, the slightly more fricative side of his music, it's not been around for some time in the Aphex Twin moniker, has in things like The Tuss is the Rush Up Edge, loads of other things that he's done under different pseudonyms, but not in the Aphex Twin sound. Until now. Now the Collapse EP is here, and it's definitely one of the most bellicose releases we've had from RDJ in a while, but I also think it's just one of the most fluxing, meticulous electronic releases that he has done himself in quite some time. It might only be 5 pieces, but every single one has a very clear beginning, middle, and end. We get a real sense of a journey throughout all of these tracks. So it's clear on the first track, First 44, which flirts with a 90s techno sound inside a deconstructed sort of drill and bass style of music, and we get these drum sounds that bounce around like ball bearings. But then as we reach the end of the track, we get a quite melancholic synth line. It just feels like he's keen on progressing all of these tracks. Perhaps not something you could be said with the Cheetah EP music, for example, but definitely for these tracks. MT1T29R2, track titles. It's one of my favourite AFX tracks in a long time, and it has that section that we first heard on the Field Day 2017 recordings. Or it is one of those moments that probably will go down as one of my favourites of this year. Just that very small musical moment is so memorable. It's so hard hitting. It drills into you. And if you've listened to it before, you'll know exactly the bit I'm talking about. Just go and listen to the track and you will hear immediately what that is. It's 28 minutes of brilliant electronic music. It's longer than some LPs, so it doesn't matter that it's an EP. I hope we get more Aphex Twin very soon. Ghetts, Ghetto Gospel, the New Testament. So I've been following Ghetts for a long time. He's one of the artists that I spoke about in the 5 albums to get you into grime video that I did last year now. And really, if you're going to talk about people that are integral to the grime scene, you cannot forget Ghetts. Ghetts is one of the most important ones. And if you have only ever sat and listened to Wiley and Dizzy Rascal, you should really check Ghetts out. Whilst he has released a fair few projects, in my opinion, nothing's ever come close to 2008's Freedom of Speech. It's a cornerstone of British hip-hop, that record. And it's the document of a young 24-year-old man who is pretty angry and has a lot of socially conscious things to say about the society that he lives in. But now he's back with Ghetto Gospel, the New Testament. He clearly wanted to do something very different with this record. First single we got was Black Rose featuring Koji Radical, and on this track it has a very bare bones production, keeping the focus on Ghetts' lyricism, which is about colorism and the pressures that black women face in our contemporary society. It's a stirring track and something that you might not have imagined Ghetts would have released. Okay, so the record isn't entirely in this style. That would be misrepresenting what this record is. There are undoubtedly bangers in here, as you would expect in a grime record, British hip hop record. You have tracks like Pick Up the Phone with its sub bass, its clicking drum sequences. You have Preach with that piano and horn sound. The Paranoid Slumdog Millionaire featuring Stefflon Don. But it's the way that Ghetts weaves the typical with the atypical that makes this record work so well, makes it flow so well. Like on the track Purple Sky, for example, featuring Wretch 3-2. It could have been one of those syrupy R&B tracks that grime records often have towards the back end of the record that often don't actually add much to the record. It feels like it's just an excuse to change up the tone a little bit. It's like you need it for a break before you get that final banger on the record. But it doesn't go full cliche. It keeps the instrumentals muted and it actually ends up being a very affecting track. Spiritual Warfare has a similar sensitivity to Black Rose with a lovely guitar run, very personal lyrics from Ghetts. I just think it's a really well done record, and he's called it, Ghetto Gospel, the New Testament. He clearly wanted to do something new with this and move away from the grime imprint in some ways, and I think he's really done himself justice and done himself proud. It's a good record, and if you have an interest in British hip-hop, you definitely need to check it out. Tim Hecker, Konoyo. Tim Hecker, the ambient drone artist who has blessed us with records like Mirages, Virgins, Rave Death 1972. I mean, if you've never listened to Tim Hecker before, this is your chance to do so. He's one of the most important musicians in this ambient drone category. He will forcefully move you with his music, especially a record like Rave Death 1972, which is one of my personal favourites, something that I want to talk about much more extensively on this channel, and hopefully will get the opportunity to do at some point. Konoyo is the follow-up to Love Streams, which was released in 2016, a record that I think I'm not alone in saying was one of his weakest, especially after that perfect run of Rave Death and Virgins. Love Streams just fell a little bit flat in comparison, but even regardless of that, the anticipation was very high for Konoyo in anything that Hecker seems to do. Konoyo is fantastic though, I'm really pleased to say. As a master of the concept, and he really does do so well when he's got a concept at the centerpiece of his music. This time the Canadian musician collaborated with a Japanese group called Tokyo Gakuso, who perform traditional Japanese music. So you get a combination of unearthly sounds and oriental styles that makes for one of the most unusual but also euphoric records that I have heard in a really long time. I find myself being drawn into this record every time I listen to it like a magnet, and it's only been out for a little while, which is why I haven't put it in the I Love category, because I think I need some more time to sit with it. But I think it's very likely by the time I get around to my best of 2018 video, it's going to be up there somewhere pretty high. As a descriptive, it's overused to the point where it almost lacks any meaning, but I'll say it anyway. This record's very cinematic. Yay, I did it. I used a cliche. But it is very cinematic in a way that other records that are called cinematic don't achieve, or they wish they could achieve. Like the opening track, This Life, for example, it has those oriental instrumental timbres and turns them into billowing plumes of colour, light and shade. There is so much to deconstruct in this music that I could not do it justice sitting here right now in this short review format. Keyed Out is scored by these string sounds that don't quite cut. They almost comfort in some respects, but never in an obvious way. A track like A Sodium Codec Haze is only 6 minutes long, and I was willing it to be 20 minutes long. I wanted to just sit and exist inside this record. I wanted it to be the length of Brian Eno's Thursday Afternoon, which is an hour long, because there's just such a vibrant world that Hecker creates with his music. It's difficult to not get so entranced by it that you don't want to leave it. You don't want it to end. You just want to continue to exist inside this world. And he consistently manages to do this with his music, and he's managed to do it again. Intrepid stuff. As I say, I probably will end up loving this record, but I need to give it more time. So I like it for now, but I dare say in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks' time, when I've really sat down and taken more time with this record, I'll end up loving it. And I hope you end up loving it too, especially if you've never sat and listened to Tim Hecker before. Definitely check it out. I love Gazelle Twin, Pastoral. First off, aesthetically, I am so into this. Look at the cover art. It reminds me of those Decca classical CD releases that you used to get. You still sometimes get them, but they've changed the look of them somewhat. I'll put a couple up to show you, but they always have like a pastoral image or a painting with that sickly yellow strap across it, and it seems like Gazelle Twin is embodying that idea there. Don't know if that's intentional or not, but I like it. Then you have this kind of red gimp outfit, which has been named by Elizabeth Bernholz, aka Gazelle Twin, as a jester. There's actually a brilliant interview with her in Loud and Quiet magazine that I think is now available online for you to check out. I'll include the link in the description because you can find out a lot more about this project, and they had a real in-depth interview with her about her artistic processes. Definitely check that out. So like the aesthetics of this project and the jester figure, Ghazal Twin's Pastoral is transgressive stuff. It's combative electronic music. It's the kind of knotty soundscapes that fuse together to create quite a beguiling experience in so many ways. I mean, you'll be listening to this and then all of a sudden you'll be startled by something that happens and then gets repeated, or an element of the soundscape gets taken away and it shocks you. And that happens a lot as you listen to this record, and I think that is absolutely part of its power. Bernholz is a very politically focused artist. She has previously drawn from criticisms of capitalism and the writings of J.G. Ballard in her music, and she hasn't changed that focus. She still has very politically charged music, and so this new record, Pastoral, is no different. It's an album that draws on the horrors of the British past and brings them into the British present. You know, in an era, in a kind of country, to be honest, increasingly defined by ideas of nationalism, loss of identity, fear-mongering, it just feels like a record for now, and I'm glad an artist like Bernholz is choosing to talk about it. She takes her choral sequences that she's so well known for, the anachronistic sounds of harpsichords, recorders, and crashes them into contemporary, up-to-the-minute electronic sounds. The haunting opening track, Folly, has this treated vocal asking what century it is, before second track, Better in My Day, rallies against that misguided nostalgia for days past. And it's a sound, it's something you probably would have heard if you've gone in any British pub. Oh, it was better in my day. Yeah, probably wasn't though, was it? But that idea is in this track, complete with belligerent percussion lines, but you also have a fluttering flute sound. You have discordant synths growing louder every second. A track like Throne is more like spoken word, a chilling kind of spoken word, which brings to light the real-world terror of personal debt. Hobby Horse is stirring, as is the cathedral-sized Glory. This record is majestic, dirty, messy, prescient, and it's one of the best records I have heard all year. Noname, Room 25. Well, goddamn, we just got blessed with one of the best hip-hop records of 2018, along with JPEG Mafia and Hermit and the Recluse. Yeah, good year. Thank you. Noname is a Chicago rapper, real name Fatima Warner, and you should have heard of Noname because in 2016 she released one of the best hip-hop projects of the 2010s so far, called Telephone. I think I know actually that I'm not alone in that opinion. It was a wonderful project, and everybody has been impatiently waiting for a follow-up ever since then. Well, she's back with Room 25, a record which we feel like we've all been waiting an absolute age for anyway. And aside from it being another document of this artist's impeccable wordplay and intelligence, I think it might actually be better than Telephone, and I did not expect to be saying that. Her musical backdrop, a very cool blend of soul and jazz, is the perfect pairing with her very open lyrical focus. So Warner talks about her brushing with fame, coping with this new view of life through an artistic lens that she also is able to make a living out of. And I think by the end of the record, by the time you reach the end of the record, you really feel like you know this artist. She lets you into her head through these tracks. More successfully than many records do. It feels like a confessional in so many ways. It feels like reading someone's diary. It just happens to be a very vibrant diary which sounds beautiful and is catchy and will be stuck in your head. The track Prayer Song nods along with a lovely swung ride pattern on the kit and those cosmic keyboard sounds, with Warner criticizing the culture of the US. The beautiful Don't Forget About Me is accentuated with these strings, and it finds Warner reflecting on her desire to be a lasting influence within her art. She wants her art to have that lasting influence, and she adopts an even softer delivery than usual. And that delivery is one of the best things about this project as well. Warner doesn't feel the need to spew her lines, spew her delivery. She elegantly delivers her vocals, and it adds another layer of intimacy to this project. And it doesn't mean that her delivery has to be slow, because she actually has a very quick delivery as well. But there's just something about the way she approaches her delivery that elevates this entire record for me. If you like hip hop, or hell, if you like music that has a heart, then you owe it to yourself and you owe it to Warner to check out this new record by Noname. It's, yeah, another fantastic record this month. Yves Tumor Safe in the Hands of Love. In a month where electronic music reigns supreme, Safe in the Hands of Love is one of the most transient records on the list. It goes through so many different moods and ideas, you cannot help fall for it. It's just a dazzling record. First up, Warp artist Yves Tumor is a Tennessee-born electronic artist, sometimes dubbed electronic, sometimes dubbed noise, whatever you want to call this music, you can call it that. It has a real penchant for production collage, bringing disparate sounds and tones together to create moody soundscapes, ones with depth but also surprisingly poppy, is something that is so effectively achieved on this record. The first two tracks, Faith in Nothing Except Salvation and Economy of Freedom, establish an impenetrable black world. It really sounds like the oral equivalent of that cover art, which is very goosebumpsy, but it doesn't stay in this gear for very long. Honesty introduces an irresistible beat, fleeting flute lines. Noid is one of the catchiest songs I've heard all year, and the way it establishes the sticky hook with the possibilities of crackling electronic sounds and noise towards the end just elevates the entire track, and it's the way that light and shade is used on this record that makes it so audacious. The stellar drum beat on the track Lifetime, which stitches a 5/4 and a 3/4 bar together, will probably remind you of math rock more than it does of electronic music, but the combination of this with the reverby vocal line, which kind of brushes the atmosphere of Have a Nice Life. I can already hear a lot of ears pricking up going, hold on a sec, what, Have a Nice Life? In that case, I'll definitely check this record out. But it has that similar emotive capacity in this track. Do yourself a favour, put some headphones on, go out in the middle of the night and just walk down some streets listening to this music. Unless you're in a really dodgy area like I am, in which case don't do that, because you'll probably end up getting like a tire iron in the back of your head, and I don't want to be responsible for that happening to you. So if you live in a very nice area, go out with your headphones on in the dark and listen to this record. If you don't, sit on your bed, because I don't want to be responsible for anyone's death. And that was my September 2018 album review roundup. Apologies once again for the very lo-fi production quality. This camera is pretty hardy, so I will get it fixed and it will be back in no time, I'm sure. Please join me on the Deep Cuts Discord on Tuesday at 10 o'clock BST, where we will be listening to Ghazal Twin's Pastoral, one of the records that I love this month, so I'd really appreciate it if you came and joined us to listen to that. Yeah, I'll be back next week with a guide to King Crimson, a guide that I'm very excited to release, and it will be there in all its glory next Monday for you to watch, unless of course Robert Fripp decides to take the video down, because he does hate King Crimson being spoken about. So there we go. I hope it's here in a week's time. If it's not, you'll know why, and it'll be on Vimeo or somewhere else for you to watch. But thank you again for watching. See you next week.